Let's see what Sean says here, and you're gonna see again how his worldview, uh, it just collapses on itself.
Respond to that, and then I've got a follow-up question if your answer remains the same as it did when I last heard you speak about this. So what do you think about that?
I'm a little bit thrown off my game because it's always red that she's never seen, and you're making it blue, and
I
I'm not quite sure how to change gears so quickly, Alex. So let me give it a try. And I think there's different. I have one opinion, but there's different ways of stating it. So
Mhm.
let me state it this way: Mary's room, even though Frank Jackson, who popularized the thought experiment, has repudiated the conclusion that it is used to draw, many other people still stick with it. I get
I
that.
did not know that.
Yeah, oh no, he's totally a physicalist now.
Wow, really? Do you know why? Like, was there like
Because
a
it's a bad argument. I can explain why I think it's a bad argument. I cannot
yeah,
promise I
sure,
can
sure.
explain why he changed his mind
Okay.
about it. But look, it's supposed to be refutation or repudiation. I was mixing up those two words together of physicalism. It's supposed to be, you're supposed to reach the conclusion that physicalism can't be true. Okay. Well, what is the physicalist saying about what's happening to Mary, the color scientist, in her room? He's saying that when she's in her room and everything is black and white and she's reading all the books on color theory and getting all of these pieces of information, she's learning things. And what that means to the physicalist is there are certain connections between certain neurons in her brain that are firing and strengthening so that when you ask her questions, she can answer them. Physicalist, reductionist account of what it means to be learning those things. Then she steps outside. Blue light wavelength photons impinge on her retina for the first time, and she sees the color blue. What happens to the physicalist? Different neurons fire in her brain, and different synapses are strengthened. No one disagrees with that. And now she says, "Oh, now I know what it's like to see and experience the color blue." Where in
So Sean's basically saying that in the room, the physicalist understanding explains all of I think it's Mary, her what's happening. That it's just merely neurons being excited by different phenomena, different sensory input, and then when she steps outside, it's just other neurons being excited. So in this part, you can see that Sean is basically saying that a physicalist understanding accounts for both Mary's experience in the room and outside of the room. But Sean is really forgetting or failing to think through what Alex is really asking, in that there seems to be something experientially that is of such a greater magnitude of quality than just what the physicalist can offer. And so Sean here is actually just kind of stubbornly digging his heels in and saying that no, the grand experience of actually seeing blue or seeing red, it's still nonetheless just the same flat experience as she had beforehand in the room. To this, we would just say that Sean is just regurgitating what he said previously, where all human experiences are just reducible. And he even says it's reductionistic. All human experiences are just merely reducible to the blind movement of particles. And and really what Sean is failing to engage with here is the unsatisfactoriness of that account. He's just merely restating his opinion here, and he's kind of clothing it in a rhetorical sarcasm in how he talks, but he's just there's really no substance in what he's saying. He's actually not really rigorously engaging with what Alex is saying, that there's a lack of sufficiency in the physicalist accounting for. He's him merely saying that physicalism explains the Mary's experience in the room and outside of the room. That's just him saying his opinion again. He's not really digging down deeper into the lack of sufficiency that physicalism itself offers.
the world is there any problem with that? Like, where is the refutation of physicalism? The physicalist explains this with 100% fidelity. There's nothing missing.
I think the issue is quite specific. At least the issue that I think is interesting, which is that Yeah, we're indebted to Galileo for telling us that maths is the language of the universe, and the scientist wants to it sort of wants to say that everything which it's possible to scientifically explain is something that you could, in principle, formulate in the language of mathematics. I don't know if you agree with that, but that's sort of the tradition that we inherit from Galileo, right? Is this idea that anything which is scientifically true can be mathematized. And if something can be mathematized and explained or described in a mathematical formula with letters and numbers, then in principle, everything that there is to know could be written down onto a piece of paper. Now, I understand that, like, when Mary exits the room and there are like different neurons that fire in her brain and that gives rise to the experience, that's fine. But if there is any kind of knowledge that she gains, anything that you could class as knowledge, and if the scientist, to use the sort of religious buzzword, believes that anything which can be known can be described in the language of mathematics, it would imply that the very knowledge that she has of that experience of blue could, in principle, have been written down onto a piece of paper, such that when she read and understood that thing on that piece of paper, she got that knowledge.
So Alex's pushback here is really, really great, honestly. So if Sean can reduce everything to physicalism, then the experience of physicalism outside of the home can easily be reduced to the sort of premise of physicalism itself, which is that everything can be ascertained by merely the physical phenomena. So Alex is saying, why can't that physical phenomena and their interrelationship, which is apprehended outside of the house, why can't that be sort of distilled and brought into inside of the house so Mary has a sufficient experience of blue? And because it seems like on that analogy that that can't happen, that that can't be the case, therefore physicalism it fails. So that's kind of what Alex is saying.
That she gets when she walks out. She could get that just from reading something that's written down. So, like, the problem for me is specifically the fact that it's not so much about physicalism, but more about scientific description. The idea that one day science will be able to explain or describe consciousness implies to me, and maybe I'm wrong about this, that science will one day be able to take that knowledge that Mary gains when she steps outside of the room and write it down onto a piece of paper, such that just by reading that thing on the piece of paper, you would get the same knowledge. I don't think that's possible. And so my
That's great. And I would agree with Alex that there are certain things that are that science does not explain. So if we have reality, if reality is a circle or a sphere, let's just say it's a circle. Reality is a circle. Science can explain a lot of that circle. It occupies part of that circle, but there is a sizable part of that circle. We could perhaps even say a majority of that circle. It's hard to really quantify that science does not explain. So there's a substantial part of reality of 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 what is that science and physicalism does not explain. And Alex is saying that if we could just reduce all of that unexplainable part to the physicalist understanding, then that would solve it. But it seems to be that there's that it, you know it doesn't really there's something that doesn't click there, that